Hello, folks. This is Alan Ibrahim from Talking Marketing, here introducing another episode. Now, before you ask yourself, well, hold on, didn't we just get that wonderful episode with Tim Halley, like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something? Isn't this podcast usually bi monthly? You would be correct. However, I have a very special episode today, so I'm releasing it earlier than anticipated. This is my conversation with Louis Gudema, who is actually one of the first, I think, if not the first, Talking Marketing repeat guest, alum of the podcast, if you will. Louis actually has a new edition of his book, Bullseye Marketing, coming out on May 2nd. And so we wanted to release our discussion in time with the promotion of the new edition. So that is why this is coming out. We had a great conversation about what it's like since the last time he was on Talking Marketing, his history as a creative type, getting into ghostwriting and being a fractional CMO, and what Bullseye Marketing actually is. So a lot of great insights in this one. I hope you get something educational out of it, and I really, really hope that you consider purchasing Louis' new edition of Bullseye Marketing, which will be available on Amazon and other retailers. With that all being said, please enjoy my discussion with Louis. Hello and welcome back to Talking Marketing, an AMA Boston podcast where I chat with marketing professionals across various industries and I try to get to the core of what makes their work impactful. I'm Alan Ibrahim, your host and director of content for the American Marketing Association's Boston chapter. And today I'm thrilled to be speaking to our very first guest of Talking Marketing, returning to us from August 2018. It's Louis Gudema. Welcome, Louis, to the show.
Hey, Alan, how you doing? Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you back. Louis, for those who don't know, is a fractional B2B CMO, a mentor to MIT startups, and the author of the second edition of the award-winning Bullseye Marketing, which will be released at the end of April. And he's also a ghostwriter of business and marketing books. So we have a lot to talk about, Louis. First of all, welcome. I always like to ask people to start off talking about their career. So can you give us kind of an overview of how your career has ended up with where you are now, ghostwriting books about marketing?
I don't know how the hell I ended up where I am now, but I started out in theater and in college and in my 20s doing theater, playwriting, and directing. And then
Wow.
I found that was, there's not a lot of money to be made in theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so was looking at a field that I could apply some of those same skills to. And I also had a lot of experience with filmmaking. And started to do writing and then some directing of videos and corporate videos and such. And that's kind of how I moved into marketing. So kind of come from the creative side of marketing. Some people come from the data side more, or the technology side these days, the software side. I come from more of the creative side.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing videos. Literally, I was sent all over the world by IBM and other clients to create corporate videos for them. I opened an agency, Magic Hour Communications, in 1998. We pivoted before it was called pivoting. Become a SaaS company before it was called SaaS. It was called Application Service Provider back then. And so we became a SaaS company and became one of the national leaders in developing and hosting websites for small colleges and private schools. I sold the agency in 2009. Then I was VP of Business Development at two mid-sized marketing agencies in Boston. And since for about the last 9 or 10 years, I've been consulting and working directly as a fractional CMO and strategist for B2B companies. That's how, from that experience, grew Bullseye Marketing. And I realized, as I was doing this, because I'm hands-on, I'm not just at a 30,000-foot level, I was realizing that a lot of the marketing advice that was out there was coming from vendors, and it wasn't always as effective for my clients as as it was purported to be. And so I started to look at, well, what was I doing? What was actually working? And that's how the Bullseye Marketing framework, how I developed that.
It makes sense, yeah. And as I've noticed with pretty much all of my guests, we don't start thinking I'm gonna grow up and be in marketing or in writing. I'm curious though if you can speak to this a little bit, how you see the connection between the creative work you did uh in your youth working on like plays and stuff, and how that turned into your skill as a writer now, how those skills kind of transferred, or if they
You
did.
know, it transfers very well. I think a lot of people think, oh, the path that I took to get into an industry or, to whatever professional success I've had is obviously the path everyone should take.
Right.
But, in one of the beauties of marketing is you do have very different, you have, a few dozen different skill sets. You have creative and writing and idea generation. You have graphic design, that's creative. But you have data, you have software, you have project management, you have client relations, and there's so many different aspects to a full marketing team. So people, my daughter does marketing, and
Mhm.
she came into it through event management. Uh,
Oh,
she really was into events, and in high school she had been a stage manager in the theater program, so which is kind of like event management.
oh, sure.
And so then, she got into doing corporate events. She didn't want to do weddings and bar mitzvahs. And one thing led to another. And now she's the not secret, senior marketing manager for Angel City, which is the professional women's soccer team in Los Angeles. So,
Amazing.
a very different route from me, but is doing a job she really likes a lot, and really with a great organization. So people can come into it from a lot of different directions.
Yeah, I think that some of the skills, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you have more experience here. Uh, they do transfer over things like group management and like wrangling a bunch of people together to make a thing to make one cohesive product, or getting people to think a different way. These are all ideas that come from the creative world that transferred pretty cleanly into things like marketing and business, I would say. I know a
Yeah,
lot of creative types like that.
yeah, and totally what you get from theater, which my daughter and I both had, is it's a very collaborative field.
Right.
Again, in theater, you've got people from set builders to actors, and they're all important. But I think people, especially young people, may sometimes not realize how it's important to be knowledgeable, but you can learn this stuff along the way. But it's really being able to work with other people and to collaborate that separates people. That if you I remember going to a conference one time, and there was a panelist from this business who said, "There's a lot of talented people in the world. Our philosophy is there's a lot of talented people in the world. Let's work with the nice ones."
Sure. Yeah. There you
And
go.
I think that in most companies and most organizations, that's the case. You need to really be able to work in marketing with people from a lot of different backgrounds, and customers from many different backgrounds, and be able to collaborate and get along.
That's the goal at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so speaking of the work that you've done, to pivot a little bit, instead of collaborative work, you're also a ghostwriter. And I'm so curious about this because I think that a lot of listeners and people out there maybe understand the idea of ghostwriting as being this very isolating thing where you write for someone else and you receive none of the credit. Can you speak about what actual ghostwriting is like and maybe what you find rewarding about that type of work and how you got into it?
Well, I've been writing, for a very long time. So I've written for other people. I was like editorial editor of my high school newspaper and things like that, and obviously was writing before then. And
Hmm.
so I've been a pretty good writer for a long time. And it wasn't called ghostwriting, but I've been writing for clients, for my entire career. So some of
Right.
those are short video scripts. Some of those I wrote, 100-page pieces for some clients.
Hmm.
So, it wasn't called ghostwriting, it was just called writing. Uh, so after I wrote my book, I let some publishers know that, if they were looking for a ghostwriter, I was interested. The book won, uh, was named one of the best marketing plan books of all time. This was like something that just dropped out of the sky. I wasn't even something I entered, and like 6 months after the book came out, I get, you've been named one of the best marketing plan books of all time. So
Amazing.
I thought that was pretty cool. But
Yeah.
I've written for the Harvard Business Review, for HubSpot, for Marketing Profs, for Tech Target, for many, many organizations, also the Boston Globe. And so I let these publishers know, and about a year ago, one of them called me up and said, "Hey, it's been a little while, but actually we do need a ghostwriter for a business book because there's so many types of books out there."
Hmm.
And So I worked with the client. He had it was a book on marketing. It was an area of marketing that wasn't my deepest expertise, so that was kind of interesting. I could learn a lot along the way, and we collaborated very well. We would have like an hour call once a week. He gave me a lot of material to look at. I brought in other material. I would give him drafts, which usually were pretty close to what he was happy with. Um, it turned out someone else he had worked with a different ghostwriter before me. And when the book was done, he was like, I just don't think, this does it. I'm gonna have
Huh.
to start over.
Oh,
And
wow.
and I and when I started work, he said, I've got this draft. You might want to read it. And I said, if you don't like it, I'm not reading a page of that. That's like the last thing I want to do is get that anywhere in my brain because, that's what you don't like.
Right.
So I said, I'll write one chapter and see if you like that. And if you do, we'll keep going. And
Hmm.
he did. And so it was about a 6 or 7 month process. Wasn't the longest of books, ended up being, I don't know, 35,000 words.
Hmm.
Uh, my book is 85,000 words.
A
Um,
little bit longer.
a little bit longer, but anyway, he was very, very happy about it. So it was a good process. I enjoyed it, and I hope to do it again.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those sort of career paths where you have to start by having credentials, like having a book to your name or writing to your name to prove to publishers that, hey, I can write. I just want to write for other people. And then you can kind of stumble into it from there.
Yeah, and like I said, I have written for other people for
That too.
much of my career.
So it was pretty familiar to you. That's really exciting, honestly. Like I don't think, especially in the States, like we don't think of that as a career path for people. It's like you can just write for other folks, or you can write material for other websites, and it doesn't have to be, your personal brand, because sometimes that work is what's more important is that it gets out there, not that you are the one whose name is on it. I think that's a really
Oh,
cool
there's a lot of
path.
people doing it. And there's a lot of I mean, sometimes, like I'm talking to a client now about co-writing a book with them, so I'll have a
Oh wow.
credit on that. But and you see that in some business books. You'll
Hmm.
see like, by Jack Welch or by Mark Benioff and the
Yeah.
is the professional writer who, could kind of bring all that writing skill to it, whereas, Mark Benioff had all the experiences and the ideas, or many of them. But there is also a lot of times like rumors in the industry about, oh, that book was ghostwritten, but they didn't
Mm,
want credit given to anyone. And
interesting.
sometimes it's biographies or memoirs or books of that sort.
Yeah.
But you'll never know for sure.
Right. It reminds me, actually, in my senior year of my MBA at UMass, our last textbook was written by a gentleman. I don't remember his name, but it was co-authored by all of his siblings, like every brother and sister. And that professor was like, just to be realistic with you guys, there's no way that they all wrote this. It's likely that he's doing them a favor, and maybe one of them wrote one paragraph, and they said, all right, sure, like let's tack on some names, make it look like it was professionally reviewed, but they all have the same last name. They're siblings. Uh,
Okay, that's a little unusual.
Big time, yeah. So it goes to show that like ghostwriting can be sounds like really fulfilling and really interesting, but also it's more common than we might think.
Yeah, and you know, you've got if you've got a CEO at a company who's giving a talk, it's probably written by someone in or out of the company. If you have, you know,
Right.
a lot them putting out thought leadership pieces, in many cases that's written by other people and so
Yeah.
forth. You know, and
Right.
sometimes those people are in PR, sometimes they're in marketing, sometimes they're ghostwriters, a lot of different, you know, they might be in a lot of different areas.
Yeah. Uh, and speaking to your writing a little bit too, let's go back to the book, Bullseye Marketing. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the subject, the concept of bullseye marketing. Can you give folks a brief overview of what bullseye marketing is precisely and sort of how it can help their business?
Yeah, so like I said, it grew out of my practice and realizing that some of the techniques or some of the tactics that were most popular or got the most buzz, like content marketing or inbound marketing or social media, um, and some others were very slow to produce results. And whereas there were other things that these companies that I was working with really had these marketing assets, what I called marketing assets,
Hmm.
that could produce results very quickly. So I would go into a company and I'd say, "Oh, how big's your email list?" And they say, "Oh, it's, you know, we've got 15,000 people." And I was like, "Oh, great. How often do you email them?" And they say, "Oh, you know, around the holidays. You know, we send them a, you know, like very happy holidays, happy New Year kind of thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, that is gold you've got
Yeah.
sitting there." And, you know, email marketing is almost free. It's,
Hmm.
you know, orders of magnitude more effective than posting to social media for B2B companies.
Yep.
And and there were other things that were just uh, these marketing assets. So for example, they had websites, but they weren't well optimized. They
Right.
didn't have good messaging. They didn't have conversion rate optimization. Um, and other things of that sort that were almost free, or a marketing and a sales team were not working together well. I had a client one time who the VP of marketing was telling me how when they send leads to sales, and these were hot leads, these were not kind of download white paper leads, these were, I want to buy your product leads, sales wouldn't follow up with them for a week or two.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
at that point, that's a dead lead. That's not
Yeah.
a hot lead. You know, that's ice cold. They don't even remember that they contacted you. It's
Hmm.
so important to respond to a hot lead, you know, in 10 minutes, um, if possible. And so there were all these, that's the center of the bullseye, these things that companies can do for almost no money that they can get quick returns on. They often see increased leads and sales in 3 to 6 months. And then the second phase of the bullseye is intent-based marketing. And so that's, you know, the prime example is search ads.
Hmm.
So if you run a good search ad program, you know, that's going to be high intent keywords.
Right.
And some people recommend starting off very broad with your keywords and slowly, you know, like narrowing it down. I recommend the opposite. Start with the really high intent keywords, the ones that you know, if someone clicks on that,
They're
they're
looking
not
for
just
you.
they're not just vaguely interested. So
Hmm.
I give an example, for example, of if someone was searching on email marketing, that would be a pretty broad term. If they were searching on email marketing software and I was selling email marketing software, well, that's better.
Yeah. More specific.
Uh, but if they were searching on email marketing software pricing, I really want to talk to that person. You know,
Right.
that's a very high intent keyword. And so start with the highest intent ones, especially since in these cases you're trying to prove that this marketing stuff works at companies that don't have a lot of it going on, and then broaden out and see about the, you know, high intent but not the absolute center of the bullseye. And then there's other hot, you know, intent marketing things like people who come to your website a lot, companies that come to your website a lot, suddenly this surge of interest, suddenly three people from company A are coming to your website,
Sure.
and they
Yeah.
weren't doing that 2 weeks ago. Or there are third-party companies like Bombora or TechTarget that sell intent data and say, people at this company are searching on this term this month.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to reach out to them. And then the outer part of the bullseye are these things like content marketing and social media and display ads and video and so forth, which are really important because that's where you're building your brand. That's where you're building what's called mental availability.
Mm-hmm.
Mental availability being that when someone is ready to buy, you are top of mind. But
Right.
95% of your potential customers probably are not buying at this moment.
Right.
And one of the problems that we've seen in marketing in the last 10 years is this huge explosion of marketing technology with all sorts of analytics around campaign optimization, and which has developed what some people or caused what some people call short-termism,
Mm-hmm.
which is that people are only concerned with, well, what did we do this month or this quarter? Building your brand and building mental availability is something that happens not just over months, but over a year or two and beyond. And but at that point, since many sales happen without them talking to 3 or 5 vendors, many sales in often a majority of sales happen with the customer talking to just one vendor or possibly two. And it's the one that built up that mental, availability, built up that brand. Let me
Mm-hmm.
give you an example from
Yeah.
um, after I sold my agency and I was VP of Business Development at another agency.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is the very first call I got, an inbound call at this agency, and this guy says, I've been following your agency for a couple of years now. I read your blog. I've seen your CEO speak. I've read your white papers. I really like your approach. We're finally ready. We need you now. So let's talk. Well, that was a slam dunk. We closed
Yeah.
that deal in 2 or 3 weeks.
Easy. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's what you want to do. You want to be in that position where when the customer is ready for you, whatever you're selling, because there's very few things that people are looking for a new vendor on all the time. Whether, if they've got a CRM, they're not going to look for another CRM for years,
Right.
probably. If they've got a website, when my company was doing websites, we knew that the colleges and schools weren't going to redo it for 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, we didn't, we created a database where we knew when they had last done it, and then we reached out when it was, in the cycle to do it again. But in between, you want to be building up that awareness and mental availability so that they are thinking of you and coming to you when it's time. So those are the 3 phases of the bullseye marketing. And the unfortunate reality, Alan, is that especially when companies are starting out, they do these in reverse.
Right.
They
Yep.
do things like content and are like, oh, inbound marketing, we need to do that. And social media, that's important. And those aren't going to work in 3 to 6 months in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the center of the bullseye and the intent marketing can. And then you have the results to build up to the long-term program.
It's a really cool way of thinking about these things and a really great framework, I think, because Louis, like it's you are starting so specific, and that may seem really counterintuitive, but as you're saying, you are directly appealing to your ultimate audience by starting specific and broadening out to the people who say, "Oh, they've already done, all of this like specific work." And then we bring in new people from there, but we don't start with let's just try to get people who are vaguely interested in us. Uh, so I think that like seems like a really potentially like successful path forward for companies. Um,
Yeah, if you think of it, you've got 3 kinds of customers.
yeah,
So you've got customers who want to buy today.
yeah,
You've got customers who know they need what you are selling, but they aren't planning to buy it
Right
right
now.
now. Maybe
Hmm.
because they just bought it, or maybe because it's in next year's budget or next year's plan or
Yeah.
something. But they're on your side, but they're not buying right now.
Hmm.
Then you've got customers who don't know that they need what you're selling. And companies often spend too much time on the third
Yeah.
and not enough time on the second and the first.
Well, I think it's almost the opposite of the marketing funnel that often business students are taught, which is that you begin with like intent to buy or interest, and then you zoom into like, buying soon, people who are buying soon. So it's almost the reverse of a marketing funnel. Was that something you were thinking about when you conceived of this framework?
There's a degree to which, so one of the things I talk about in the new edition of the book is bottom of funnel versus top of funnel content.
Yeah.
And I talk about it a few times. And so top of funnel content um, generates way more traffic, but a
Right.
lot of that is unqualified traffic. Bottom of funnel content generates way more leads,
Right. And it's all
but
qualified traffic.
it's much smaller amount of traffic.
Hmm.
So you need both. You want to be filling, you want to have those top of funnel people aware of you and, nurturing them and sending them your newsletter and, getting them back to your blog and looking at your videos and et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
But you also need those bottom of funnel leads. Um, and so well, I think of phase one, another part of phase one is selling more to current customers. But
Interesting.
because that's your customers are another one of your marketing assets.
Hmm.
Um, but it's not. I think of phase one as setting the foundation for the success of phase two and three, because part of phase
Hmm.
one is getting your messaging right, your positioning right, getting your website updated, getting your conversion rate optimization
Of course.
going on the website. It's a total waste of money if you're driving traffic to your website and you don't have good CRO, because it's like trying to fill a bucket that's full of holes. It's just all going to go right through.
For sure.
So phase one is going to generate business quickly, inexpensively, and lay the foundation for the success of phases two and three.
It's big brain stuff, honestly. Like I'm thinking about this in the context of so many different types of marketing, whether it's like content or B2B or B2C.
Mhm.
You and I actually spoke before this briefly about how you think in the book you talk about this like 50-50 balance between brand lead generation, optimal balance, like for business to for B2B companies.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's where this is the most useful? Because we also talked about how even though some of this seems very 101, that a lot of CMOs and higher up people were telling you, hey, I've never heard of ideas like this. I've never thought about things like this.
Yeah, sometimes. So, for example, the foreword for the new edition of the book is written by Douglas Burdett, who's
Yep.
the host of the Marketing Book podcast, great podcast.
Hmm.
He's also the head of an agency in Norfolk, Virginia, and he had Madison Avenue experience before that.
Hmm.
And yet he says in the foreword they loved Bullseye Marketing because there were ideas in there he could take back immediately and apply at his agency, although he had 20, 25 years of experience, whatever. Um, but the thing about the 50-50 balance is I had this idea for the Bullseye, and then after I wrote it, I learned about this research that was done by Les Binet and Peter Field in the UK, where they had looked at 1,000 major campaigns, and they had found that the optimal balance for B2B companies is to
Hmm.
do about a 50-50 split between brand marketing and lead
Lead
generation
generation.
marketing.
Hmm.
And that if you did just lead generation marketing, in the long run, you were shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and I have a quote in the book from Jaleh Rizai, who is now she's the CEO of Mutiny, which is a marketing AI company. She
Oh
was the
wow.
CMO of Gusto when they grew from 500 to 50,000 customers. So she was, a highly successful CMO. And she
Mm-hmm.
says whenever she would turn off her brand marketing at Gusto, 6 months later, their CAC would go through the roof and all their campaigns became less effective. And so brand marketing, and this is one of the mistakes that people make too, is
Right.
brand marketing helps drive the effectiveness of lead generation. Lead generation does not build your brand though. You
Mm-hmm.
can, because they have fundamentally different messages.
Mm. Of
Brand messages tend to be emotional
course.
and long term, and
Mm-hmm.
lead generation messages tend to be rational and very, very short term. Like
Mm-hmm.
you either click on this ad now or you forget about it 3 minutes later
Yeah.
or 30 seconds later.
Mm-hmm.
But think about, Alan, you probably can remember some TV commercials from when you were a kid.
Of course.
Of course, we all can.
Yeah.
Those are great brand commercials.
Yeah.
And that's what brand marketing does, is it may not drive you out to buy today, but it sticks with you for a long time. And the more you have the brand marketing, the more it compounds and builds in the minds of your customers.
I think that's such a great point. And a lot of times companies may see that long-term investment as not useful because like you said, we need leads now, we need results today, and everything is so rushed because there's this like sense of false urgency. But as a kid, I watched that it's a Sears commercial where it's a husband and wife and they're talking, it's like in the heat of summer and they're talking about wanting to buy an AC unit. And I still remember the exact script of that commercial because one, it's just very memorable and charming, and two, like it appeals to a certain like desire to be comfortable and to be in your family unit and be happy, that's just permanent. Like like for the rest of my life, I will think about this simple 30-second Sears commercial from the
Yeah.
1990s. And now in the future, in theory, when I'm looking at AC units for my, future home, I'm thinking about that Sears commercial because it just stuck. It successfully built a long-term relationship with the brand.
Yeah. It's, you associate Sears with air conditioners. And next time you need an air conditioner, that's going to be one of the things on your mind.
Right. From almost 30 years ago at this point. It's
Yeah,
wild.
I know. Well, but it doesn't, so Adidas, for example, I gave that example of uh, Dele Rizai, who talked about this B2B company and
Hmm.
how important brand marketing was for them. And uh, but Adidas a few years ago said, they're competing with Nike,
Hmm.
one of the premier brand marketers in the world.
Right.
Nike spends billions on brand marketing
Hmm.
every year. And Adidas said, we're just going to do lead generation and digital marketing. It's so measurable, it's so optimizable. We are confident we can get better results by doubling down on that and not doing brand marketing.
Hmm.
And 4 years later, they publicly said, oops, that was a mistake.
Right.
We
Right.
now realize we just, blew it, and we're losing results because we are not doing a significant amount of brand marketing in addition at the same time as the lead generation marketing.
Correct.
And so that's where creative comes in. So one of the things for small companies, so the number one multiplier of marketing is the size and market share of the advertiser or the
Hmm.
marketer. So companies with a lot of brand awareness and a lot of market share, their marketing is more effective because they're already well known.
Hmm.
Um, but the second biggest multiplier of marketing is creativity. And so, you can't change your market share overnight, but you can be more creative tomorrow.
Right.
And if you can't do it, and some people say you need different people to do brand and lead gen, and that's another question. But if you can't if you've got a great lead gen team, but you don't have a good brand team or a good creative team, bring in the people who can do that for you.
It's well said. And hey, it all comes back to that early part of your career, working in creative, working in theater and writing is
Yeah.
that's the thing that differentiates you, is being able to be creative at a moment's notice.
Well, I don't know if
Uh,
it's a moment's notice, but
or sure,
so
in your plans in the longer term.
yeah, exactly. You put out a lot of ideas and you find out, oh, this is the one that really resonates. Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, you just have to keep trying.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so speaking back to your origins, I mentioned before you were the first ever guest on Talking Marketing back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So it's been about 5 years, and I'm curious now, what are some trends in the marketing world, maybe relevant to your book, maybe not, that you are really interested in right now that have like kind of come up since your last appearance?
Well, marketing's a really trendy industry, right?
Yes, big time.
And I think a lot of these trends come and go, and they seem hot for a while, and then so I think inbound has for many industries peaked a few years ago,
Yep.
and isn't as valuable for many companies as it once was.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, organic social media marketing is nowhere near as important as it was 10 years ago
Right.
for B2B. Um, whereas paid social, I think, is a tremendous, I love that. It's so targetable,
Mm-hmm.
the paid social ads. And LinkedIn especially always has new formats and new opportunities.
Yeah.
Obviously, the hot one right now is AI. I
Yeah.
heard I heard a great use of AI in marketing a few days ago, where this guy posted that they were working on a campaign and they asked ChatGPT to, come up with 5 or 10 ideas. And
Okay.
those were the ideas they dismissed as being obvious and banal. And it was like, okay,
Oh.
we won't do that. Let's let's us humans come up with the new original creative stuff.
Oh, I love that.
I thought that was just fabulous. I thought that was one of the best things.
Because so much of the way people are using AI right now is like it will replace, it will supplant, or it will enhance what we're doing. And that's kind of like, okay, it is a framework. It is a generalized, literally, that's how it works, is it just like sucks up, it hoovers up ideas and information in the least unique way possible. Let's make the opposite of that. That's
Yeah,
super cool.
yeah, I thought that was great. And I know some people who use it to like brainstorm ideas or just come up
Sure.
with come get 20 topics that they can write a blog post on or something of that sort. But I thought I thought that was genius. Um, so but the fundamentals, Alan, marketing at its core never changes.
Right.
Marketing is about understanding people, and that's why talking to people, understanding the emotions that drive them, creating messages that speak to their problems, that speak to their emotions. There's a book but called Scientific Advertising.
Claude
Uh,
Hopkins. Yeah.
yeah, and it's still a tremendously valuable book, and it was written in 1923, exactly 100 years ago,
Right.
and yet there's almost nothing that's out of date because he's talking about how do you write uh, and how do you appeal to people? What are some of the messages? What are some of the constructs that work and they still work?
It's a book that's so iconic and important that it even made an appearance in the TV series Mad Men, from my little bit of research, because that takes place in the 60s and at an
Yeah,
ad agency, and there's a character in the first season of that show, Peggy, who's reading scientific advertising. And yeah, as you said, like it's super relevant today. It's really fascinating.
right.
Because
Well, then it was only 40 years old.
right, true.
Now,
At that
now it's
point it was,
100 years old.
and it's still relevant,
Yeah,
which I think
totally.
goes to say that like we talk so much about change on this podcast and how education is so difficult with this field because things are always evolving, and it's like, yeah, but emotions are the same. We didn't like, if we have evolved as humans, but we still feel the same things and we want the same things on a basic like ideological level.
The core of marketing never changes. It's only the channels and tactics that change. It's only the ways that you can reach people. So maybe 100 years ago, when Clyde Hopkins was doing that, they were thinking, oh, radio might be fun to experiment with, and then so around Mad Men, a big thing was TV, and and now we've got dozens of channels,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still about getting the message to the right person and the right message.
Absolutely. And so my last question for today, we're talking about the past, we're talking about how things have evolved. It's not one I ask people very often, but because you've been around the block more than a few times and you're a returning guest, I'm curious if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, to 18-year-old Louis, and you could tell him anything about your career, about where things are going, what is it that you would tell him?
I actually got one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my entire life, my first day of college.
No kidding. Wow.
So I was going to the University of Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and we were in the dorm, and like the resident advisor, sat down, like 15 of us freshmen,
Sure.
and said, the University of Michigan is a big bureaucracy, and you're going to want to do something, and you'll go to someone and say, can I do this? And they'll say no. And what you do is you just keep asking until you find someone who says yes, and you accept that as the answer. And that is, and that is just such great advice for how to approach life, because whether it's in your career or your romances or so many things, like you're going to get shot down a lot. I'm reading a book by Morgan Housel, who is an author I like very much. He wrote a great essay called The Universal Laws of the World, which
Mm-hmm.
check it out sometime, which is
Yeah.
uh, some great stuff. But this is called The Psychology of Money. And he talks about how um, Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, they've
Mm-hmm.
invested in 400 or 500 companies,
Right at this point, yeah.
but there's only like 10 of them that drove a huge part of their returns.
Mm-hmm.
And that his partner said, if it wasn't for those 10 companies, you never would have heard of us.
Right.
And he says, Morgan Housel says, you hear about these art collections where someone donated an art collection worth, 100 million or $1 billion to the
Mm-hmm.
MFA. I said, well, they may have 200 or 300 paintings, but there's probably 5 or 10 of them that are the ones that are really famous. Those are the Picassos and the Matisses and so forth. Those are the
Monets.
ones that really, produce that $1 billion value. And so, in marketing, a lot of what we do is try a lot of things, and we find, those few that really, knock it out of the park.
It's so interesting how no matter what we talk about, it comes back to creatives, right? Because I think a lot about like the musicians that I really love and how they also worked on album after album, mixtape after mixtape of producing, and nobody heard of them until they had the one song or they had the one record that popped, so to speak. And so yeah, it is a matter of just trying to, as you said earlier, getting a lot of no's until you get a yes. Uh and just
Yeah,
putting
I
stuff out
think
there.
I heard Bruce Springsteen say that for like a recent album he recorded in the studio, he did like 50 or 60 songs before he decided on the 12 that would make it to the.
Yeah. I believe it because you, especially like when you are that invested in what you're making, you're not going to settle for just putting out everything. You want to put out the good stuff,
Yeah.
especially when
But you
you're
can tell you
Springsteen.
can tell my references are from perhaps a different generation. Uh, but they're all relevant anyway.
Yeah, it's like scientific advertising. It's not not that Springsteen's from the 20s, but that it's a dated reference, but it still applies for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Louis, that's what I have though. Anything else that you wanted to talk about or ask or delve into?
No, I hope people found this useful. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and hope that they will take a look at the book. Um, and find it useful.
Absolutely. He's at Louis Gudema, LOUISGUDEMA on Twitter and LinkedIn. The book is Bullseye Marketing, How to Grow Your Business, How to Grow Your B2B Business Faster. And it's the new edition that'll be out by the end of April. So
Yes.
a little bit after this episode comes out. You can find it on all of the platforms that you find books. Louis,
So
thank
thank you,
you.
Alan.
Of course, yes. I was so happy to have you. I hope this was a fun discussion for you as much as it was for me.
Yeah, very much so.
And that is going to do it, folks. I will have a plug zone segment at the end of the episode here, pre-recorded, of course. If you want to hear more about AMA Boston or connect with people like Louis or myself. And that's what we have for now. We'll be back in about a month and a half or so with more episodes of Talking Marketing. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Talking Marketing and you want to hear more of our conversations with marketing professionals, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other major podcast platform of choice. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube as AMA Boston. And most importantly, if you'd like to support the work we do here, please consider becoming an AMA Boston member by heading over to amaboston.org/become-a-member. AMABoston.org is also the #1 place to find all of our work, including the AMA Boston blog, events calendar, job board, and a whole suite of ways to volunteer with our team. We get to keep doing this thanks to the support of listeners like you. Thank you.